Thank you, and I'm delighted to be here, and I've had a full and interesting day, and talking with some students this afternoon was particularly an interesting occasion. There's an echo for me. I hope it's all right for you. And I'm honored to be part of this series. What's going on April 30 sounds like a really impressive lineup. I wish I could hear it, so you can look forward to that. I was invited originally to come here by Professor Chris Mitchell last summer, and so I thought, and he was very helpful. He's been a friend, and he was very helpful to me in working on the project I'm doing on C.S. Lewis and Mere Christianity. So I think lecturing about that is an appropriate kind of homage to him. As Professor Wright said, I'm working on a book for the Princeton University Press series. It's called The Lives of Great Religious Books, and it's about the origins and the life of a book. And one of the things that strikes me in working on Mere Christianity is its continuing vitality. So I'm interpreting life in part in terms of the idea of something that is vital and actually has grown in popularity from the time when it was originally published in the mid-20th century. Since 2001, it has sold in English alone over 3.5 million copies, which is just a remarkable number of copies for a book of that era. It's hard to think of anything else from that era that sells like that. And it's been translated all over the world. I'm told, I have a friend who is a veteran teacher in China. He says that in China, among educated Christians, next to the Bible, Mere Christianity is the book that they are most likely to have read. But it's particularly popular in the United States, and particularly popular among evangelicals. In 2000, when Christianity Today was talking, surveying for the book of the century, books of the century, Mere Christianity came out number one as the most important books that their readers reported. Or just 2 years ago, during the March Madness, the Christian Emerging Scholars Program of University ran on their website a poll in which they nominated 64 books for the Best Christian Book of All Time tournament. And they seeded these, and then there were about 100 people voting. And so Mere Christianity got into the final four, and there it defeated Bonhoeffer's The Cost of Discipleship in the semis, but then sadly lost to Augustine's Confessions. But wait until next year. So it's just an amazing phenomenon that this book still has resonance this much later. There are other books that try to do the same thing, and some very good ones. Tim Keller has a nice introduction to Christianity, or N.T. Wright. But this book really still has more resonance. So I want to ask, what can we learn from that? What are the qualities about that we can learn from, and you can think about qualities that you might want to emulate? As you probably know, Mere Christianity emerged as a series of four lecture series on the BBC during World War II in the 1940s. And one interesting part of this, and then it was originally published as 3 little booklets, two sets of lectures in one booklet, and then the other 2 sets of lectures as separate, very small 50-page books. And then as a sort of afterthought, in 1952, Lewis put these together as the single book, Mere Christianity. And one of the interesting things about the reception of the book is that when it first came out, a lot of American evangelicals were somewhat suspicious of Lewis. They liked the fact that he was the author of the Screwtape Letters, and he clearly affirmed supernaturalism, and that was on his side. But he didn't really talk much about the Bible, and so evangelicals at places like this were somewhat wary of that. He smoked, he drank, he didn't fit the evangelical image. So there was a little bit of distancing from Lewis, and actually mainline Protestants were more embracing of Lewis in the mid-20th century than evangelicals were. And it's an interesting story, which is another story of how Lewis became adopted by evangelicals as sort of being the evangelical, the author for thinking evangelicals. But what I want to think about tonight is what are the traits of Lewis's work in Mere Christianity that give it this vitality? Or you might think of it in terms of what are the intellectual virtues in this book that you might learn from. And I think they are worth reflecting on. And often I might say they are virtues that maybe appeal to American evangelicals because many of these virtues haven't been very well cultivated within the American evangelical tradition, and so they fill a gap. So I have five of these characteristics or virtues. First of all, Lewis always was looking for the timeless truths rather than for the latest insights. And this is a trait that separated Lewis from almost all of the major thinkers of the mid-20th century. And it also, incidentally, one of the things that separated him from many of the fundamentalists and American evangelicals at the time. They thought that they were standing simply for old-fashioned Christianity and the Bible alone, but the idea of going back to the Bible alone often involved a sense of skipping over 19 centuries of church history and ignoring history and simply trying to get right back to the text of the Bible, which in fact led to some innovations or very simplistic ways of explaining things. Whereas Lewis, by contrast, is very deeply grounded in history. He was, after all, a literary scholar. That's what he did. And so his goal was, as an apologist, was to look for perennial Christian truths that had stood the test of time, as opposed to the tyranny of the latest fashions, in the latest intellectual fashions. And that, if you've read about Lewis and his autobiography, you'll see that reflects his own experience. He was of that generation of intellectuals. People talk about the disillusion of the intellectuals of the 1920s. Well, that was Lewis's generation, people who'd been brought up in late Victorian, Edwardian world. Suddenly that world falls apart during World War I. He had to serve in the battlefield of World War I. He was deeply disillusioned with the Christianity he had been sort of formally brought up on, lost his faith, and was in search for truth. And one of the insights that he gained in this quest for truth came from a friend of his when he was at Oxford in the 1920s, Owen Barfield, who talked to Lewis about what Barfield called chronological snobbery. That's the idea that the latest ideas are automatically the best. And Lewis found that as a very liberating idea, to get away from the sense that the latest scientific ideals represent what he later called the great myth, that there's an evolutionary progress of human knowledge, and that relieved him to be able to look back to the past for knowledge, and just as importantly, to see one's own era as a period among other eras, that this is an era just like the 19th century or the 16th century, that has its own insights, but that can be valued, but it also has its own blind spots. So right after Lewis was converted in the early 1930s, he wrote an autobiographical, fictional account called The Pilgrim's Regress, which is a sort of it was a takeoff on The Pilgrim's Progress, and his pilgrim is rescued from some of the intellectual temptations of the day. He's rescued from a giant called the Spirit of the Age, and there's and the giant, like modern science, claims to see through everything to its true material essence. And then the pilgrim escapes from Freudianism, modern literary theories, idealistic philosophies, modernized theologies. So this was liberating for Lewis to be able to look for the past and not be taken in by the glib scientific claims of that there's evolutionary progress in human thought. And so in his fiction, if you've read the Space trilogy, it's the pseudoscientist is one of the villains, people who are using science for their own purpose. Lewis is always careful to say true science has its place, and we need to learn from the genuine insights of our own time. But dabbling in science can be very dangerous. And so in Screwtape, Screwtape writes to his protege, Wormwood, says that to keep the patient away from the real sciences, but let him dabble in economics and sociology. I hope there's no one here in economics and sociology, but that's what Lewis says, and Lewis is always right. But he said, but best of all, let him read no science, but to give him the general idea that he knows it all and that everything he happens to have picked up in casual talk and reading is results of modern investigation. Lewis's quest for the timeless truth is clearly related to the lasting vitality of the book. In the mid-20th century, Lewis was disparaged by many of his Oxford colleagues, and because his views seemed to be so quaint and out of date. And some of the modern theologians were very critical of Lewis, saying Lewis has this old-fashioned kind of theology. But now when we look back 60, 70 years later, it's those views of the mid-20th century that look quaint and out of date, whereas Lewis's views that are grounded in what's lasted are not surprisingly still lasting. I think also, and this could be a point in itself, but it's an implication of looking for the timeless truth, and that is that it helps Lewis avoid the political temptation. And that, I think, is a temptation very prominent among Christians in his day and since. That is, and Screwtype puts it, he suggests to Wormwood that the patient's political views should be emphasized as part of his religion, and then he says, then let him, under the influence of a partisan spirit, come to regard his political views as the most important part. Then the final step is to have the patient see Christianity as valuable chiefly for the excellent arguments it provides for his political positions. And so, accordingly, Lewis was very careful to avoid the snare of tying Christianity to the partisan politics of the day, to the latest issues of the day, which he saw as diverting people from thinking about the timeless truths that were the aim, that were the essence of the faith. So that's point one, the emphasis on looking for the timeless truths. And in the Torrey Honor College, clearly that's one of the things you're well equipped to do. Second, Lewis's contact with his audience is through looking for the traits of perennial human nature. He was a classic academic scholar of obscure texts and the like, buried in books, and you might think that he wouldn't have been able to reach to communicate with a broad audience as on the radio, but if you've seen the movie Shadowlands, he's sort of presented as a bit out of it academic. But the fact is that he was very alert to looking at how ordinary people thought about things. And one of the ways to try to get at that was to try to find what were the common traits of human nature throughout the ages. Malcolm Muggeridge said of Lewis that Lewis was Bunyan's man rather than Thomas Aquinas's, and by that he meant that Lewis was always thinking about every man rather than simply looking at high theology. He was an admirer of Samuel Johnson. He was interested in looking for what's the common sense of the race. And so that meant when he was asked to speak on the radio to virtually everyone in the BBC. During the war, BBC, there were only two stations. And so he had to speak to every kind of person. And so he could do that because at the same time he was a student of history, he paid attention to the way contemporary people thought and talked. He talked about translating into the language of the people whom you're talking to. He went off to during the war to RAF stations and talk to the soldiers about Christianity, and he also listened to what they said. And one of the things he recognized in the modern world, one of the peculiarities of 20th century British thought, and one of the great obstacles to presenting Christianity was that people in the mid-20th century in Britain had been encouraged to think that they were already good the way they were. And if you think, that was the mid-20th century, the 1940s, how much more that's the message that's the preeminent message in our culture. People are good the way they are. And Lewis recognized that if that's the way the people think, the first step in communicating with them is to try to find some way to let them think that they might have a sense of guilt. So what he does at the very beginning of Mere Christianity is he starts with a very simple illustration. Everyone's heard someone arguing about things. It might be a simple argument about a place in line, and he leads people to say, well, there is a right and a wrong. Everyone has a sense of justice. And from that, you can lead people to say, and sometimes people violate that. We're, after all, in a war fighting against the Nazis. If there isn't a right and wrong in the universe, how can we say we're right and they're wrong? And so he gradually gets people to be thinking about questions of good and evil, and then that becomes a preamble to presenting the gospel. But the way he gets there is by looking for these common traits in human nature. Third point is an essential feature, and it's closely related to this looking for a point of contact with perennial human nature, is that mere Christianity is not just a set of rational arguments, but it's designed to confront the whole person. Sometimes people, I've heard people, I talk to lots of people about mere Christianity these days, and some people will say, oh, it's too rationalistic for me. Or I've seen people say that, oh, mere Christianity, that doesn't really appeal to 21st century people. It's too much rational arguments. But those sorts of views really haven't looked at it very carefully, because as lots of people have commented regarding mere Christianity, Lewis, even though he puts in many arguments, it is nonetheless, he is appealing not simply to reason, but just as much to your imagination. And he specifically makes this point about himself and the way he thinks. He says, I'm a rationalist in the sense that reason is the natural organ of truth, but imagination is the organ of meaning. And so reason can't operate except in the context of what do you mean by things. And the way we understand things, he says, is by producing new metaphors or revivifying old ones. We understand, and that is, you understand reality through analogies and images. If you're trying to get your mind around something, one way to do it is to say, well, what's that like that I do understand? And Lewis is very much a genius at looking for analogies and images. His first aspiration was to be a poet, and so he was very deeply immersed in looking for ways of communicating things through metaphor and analogy. It was something he studied. It was like second nature to him. So combining that sensibility, where he's always looking for images and metaphors and analogies to study things, with a razor-sharp reasoning. And he had been taught by one of his early teachers to always be able to give a very sharp, rational arguments for whatever he believed. That combination was so much second nature to him that I think of him as sort of comparable to Mozart in music, where Mozart, could just very quickly just see the way things had to work together. He worked in a musical tradition, and he was so immersed in both the sense of rationality and the sense of beauty, he could just put things together. And so Lewis is like that he's so immersed in the tradition and so immersed in thinking about images and so used to making sure that everything checks out logically, that he can toss off a series of broadcasts on the radio and without any intention of really putting them together as a book, and it emerges as one of the classics of Christianity. So lots of people have remarked on his ability. You think you're listening to a rational argument, but he's presenting you with a vision that somehow puts you yourself into a story, so that the Lewis of the Narnia tales is very much the same Lewis of Mere Christianity. Mickey Maudlin, who is the editor at Harper One that publishes Lewis's works, has reflected on this and the connection between the fiction and Mere Christianity. And he said, so in Lewis, you're constantly being asked to take an imaginative journey in which you are asked to choose sides. So this is Maudlin. If Christianity is true, then you are not merely right theologically, you are joining Aslan's army. You are in league with the Eldila angels. You're God's rulers of the planets. You're in a battle for your soul with the tempter. You're on a bus trip to heaven, hoping that you will be invited to stay. And so similarly, in Mere Christianity, says Maudlin, because, people pick it up because they hear it's the best summary of what it means to be a Christian and what Christians believe, but then they're taken in by the striking images that bring them into the picture. So what you find, says Maudlin, is an identification of a moral compass that you did not realize existed. One that says you are not measuring up. The story of how God sent Jesus as an invasion into the world to start a revolution. That doctrines are not merely maps, but that doctrines are really maps to show you your choice and to guide you forward on your journey. And that all this is about God, Jesus, and the church is really about you. Will you admit your need, receive God's help, and start the process of being perfected, made into a little Christ, so that you can pursue further adventures with God in his heavenly realm, the world that has been created for you to inhabit. Lewis, in another of his works, The Miracles, he talks about the relationship of reason and imagination. And he says, understanding Christianity can be understood by this image, that let's suppose that we possess parts of a novel or a symphony, and but it's not complete. And someone now brings us a newly discovered piece of the manuscript and says, this is the missing part of the work. This is the chapter on which the whole plot of the novel really turned. This is the main theme of the symphony. Our business would be to see whether this passage, if admitted to the central place which the discoverer claims for it, did actually illuminate all the parts we have and bring them together. And he says elsewhere that I believe in Christianity like I believe in the sun, not just because I see the light, but because it lights up everything else. And so that kind of detective work of seeing, is this the thing that really pulls it all together, involves necessarily rationality, but it also involves an imaginative sensibility to see, does this really work? Does it really fit the story, to fit the plot? And the main use of imagination, I think, for Lewis, is to respond to his awareness of another peculiarity of the modern world, and that is that the modern world is a deeply disenchanted universe. Most people, through most of the human history, had lived in an enchanted world, but we live in disenchanted world. So one of the functions of imagination is to counter the disenchantment that one finds in the world. So contrary to what some people imagine, that mere Christianity is basically just a set of arguments, Lewis is saying that our reasoning operates in the context of our predispositions. So if you've read The Abolition of Man, he goes into criticizing how modern ideas say things like your sense of beauty is simply telling about your state of affairs, but there isn't any objective beauty out there. So reasoning is shaped by your cultural context, and our cultural context is disenchanted. So what's necessary is to have it re-enchanted. I think one of the nicest examples of that is in The Magician's Nephew. And you have Uncle Andrew, who is supposedly a magician, but really a very modern person, and thinks of himself as quite scientific. And so when Aslan begins to sing to bring Narnia into existence, Uncle Andrew can only hear the lion roaring. Everyone else can hear the singing, but Uncle Andrew can't hear it because he said, "Whoever heard of a lion singing?" So his very modern views block him from being able to see the reality. So in reaction to that, Lewis is using the imagination as a sort of counter magic, that what we need to do is to re-enchant the universe, and you can't do that just by reasoning. You need to reignite that sensibility in people. You can see this explicitly in his sermon, The Weight of Glory, where he appeals to our deepest sense of beauty and longing and desire. And then he says this: "Do you think I am trying to weave a spell? Perhaps I am. But remember your fairy tales. Spells are used for breaking enchantments as well as inducing them. And you and I have need of the strongest spell that can be found to wake us from the evil enchantments of worldliness, which have been laid upon us for nearly 100 years. Almost our whole education has been directed to silencing this shy, persistent inner voice. Almost all modern philosophies have been devised to convince us that the good of man is to be found on earth." And then he goes on with the famous passage that I'm sure most of you have heard. He says, "It's a serious thing to live in a society of possible gods and goddesses, to remember that the dullest, most uninteresting person you talk to may one day be a creature which, if you saw it now, you would be strongly tempted to worship. or else a horror and a corruption such as you now meet it at all, only in a nightmare. All day long we are in some degree helping each other to one or the other of these destinations. It is in the light of these overwhelming possibilities, it is with the awe and circumspection proper to them, that we should conduct all our dealings with one another, all friendships, all loves, all play, all politics. There are no ordinary people. And that's a wonderful application of the sensibility of re-enchanting the universe and re-enchanting the way we see our neighbors. In trying to break this disenchantment, Lewis, of course, doesn't denigrate the role of reason, but nonetheless, mere Christianity turns out to be anything but simply rationality. It's taking people on an imaginative journey and saying to them, you are in the midst of a real life cosmic drama, and Christianity is offering a way that you can be remade. Fourth feature, and that is the most obvious, and can be covered a little more briefly, and that is Lewis is talking about mere Christianity. He gets that term from the 17th century writer Richard Baxter, and in the preface to the book in 1952, he explains that by mere Christianity he means the belief that has been common to nearly all Christians at all times. And once again, it's this historical consciousness that determines his outlook, that he's looking for those essential points of Christianity that have been around long before I was born, and whether I like them or not. And contrary to those who say, well, if you're just looking for the points that everyone agrees on, you're going to have a very watered down or lowest common denominator Christianity. Lewis shows that those essentials are really can be very substantial and powerful. And I think that appeal to what Christians through the ages have always agreed on, those essential points they've always agreed on, has a great appeal today. It may be an overstatement to say that we live in a post-denominational age, but we certainly live in an age where denominational loyalties are far less than they were 100 years ago. And world Christianity is burgeoning with all sorts of new movements and breaking away from traditions. And in that context, I think there is a sensibility that we can find, or we need to find, points in which we have in common with the great variety of Christians throughout the world. And Lewis helps us recognize those commonalities so that even though we are institutionally divided, there is still a sense that there is a mere Christianity and a practical ecumenism that we can share. And I think that's very appealing to Christians in the 21st century, to have a sense that what we believe is not simply just what our little group believes, but is something that's grounded in a much longer tradition. I've had quite a few people say, mere Christianity that really changed my life. I was brought up as a Christian, but it came to, I thought we had very parochial ideas, but this was just a broadening kind of experience. and in addition to that, and again, this perhaps could be a separate point, very importantly, this mere Christianity turns out to be substantial, and it's not cheap grace, to use the term that Bonhoeffer developed about the same time. Mere Christianity is not cheap grace. It's not minimal Christianity. It's not easy or safe, but rather, as Lewis invites you on this journey, he is drawing people into understanding Christianity that's going to be extraordinarily demanding on them personally. And he leads people to see that what they need to do is actually to give up their self. And a lot of conversion stories, such as Charles Colson's, of reading the chapter on the great sin of pride and recognizing that's me and I have to give up that self. And then Lewis says the whole purpose of the church is to make people into little Christs, to be transformed. And this is not simply an easy process that it automatically happens, but something that's going to be a lifelong struggle and a process. So mere Christianity is not cheap grace. It's not simple Christianity, but it's something that is demanding a process of actually being in Christ or becoming a little Christ. And what does that mean? And I think that's a point at which people from almost every tradition, and certainly reading Scripture, that's one of the central messages of Scripture, that we need to be united to Christ. And when people see that, it's one of these moments where they say, of course, that's what I need to do. That's what it's about. Finally, and briefly, the perennial appeal of mere Christianity has a lot to do with Lewis's genius. It's not so much based just on Lewis's genius, but on his ability to point readers to the luminosity of the gospel itself. In 1939, Lewis published an essay on the personal heresy in literary criticism, and he argued that it's wrong to view a poem as about the poet's state of mind. The poet is not a man, he said, who asked me to look at him. He is a man, or a person, man or woman, who says, look at that, and points. The more the pointing of his finder, the more I follow the pointing of his finder, the less I can possibly see of him. And I think Lewis would have said that same thing of his work as an apologist. Had he been drawing attention primarily to his self and on his own peculiar ways of thinking, his work would have had relatively little lasting impact. But one of the greatest sources of the vitality of the work is that he's pointing the reader or the listener to an object. And as many others have observed of him, he acts as a friendly companion or a guide on a journey. I think to expand this image, he's like a companion who is an expert naturalist. We have a friend teaches at Fuller who takes us into the San Gabriel Mountains. John Thompson is a theologian who was a park ranger and a naturalist before, and he's terrific to go on a hike with because he sees everything. He points out little flowers and things that you wouldn't notice. And I think of Lewis in that way. Suppose you had a great naturalist who takes you on a journey into some magnificent mountains, and you're very appreciative of this guide, but then he takes you around a corner and you see the most beautiful sight of mountains and lakes that you've ever seen, and you're completely enthralled by the beauty that's there. You're very grateful to the guide who brought you there, but ultimately what you take home from that is the beauty that the guide has pointed you to. And this I see as what Lewis is able to do, that he's able to point us to the beauty that there is in Christianity. And beauty is something that has a power to overwhelm you, that it's something that simply by the power of the beauty and without, it doesn't undercut your own free will, but it leads you, by its power, it draws you toward itself. And I think that's ultimately the vision of Christianity, that Lewis uses his imagination, uses his reason to point you toward the most beautiful thing in all reality, the love of Christ for humanity and the offer of salvation. Amen.
We hope you enjoyed this message. Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Learn more at biola.edu.